Wooden boxes are great weekend projects. They don't take a lot of wood or time to make, plus they make great gifts. Who couldn't use a little storage box for rings, watches, and other small items? I made this box from walnut and maple to contrast the top and bottom against the middle section. These colors make it look a bit like an ice cream sandwich. The design cut into the top is complex, so it may be a reach for anyone new to scroll sawing. As always, I'll give you some tips along the way. Let's make this. I was looking for a new project to start. I've been doing quite a few toys lately, and I thought I'd move to a home decor item for a little break. This is not going to be an easy one. I don't think I recommend this for a beginner on the scroll saw. It's a little box. I got this from Steve Good. He calls it an ice cream sandwich box. He says, that wasn't my intent to call it an ice cream sandwich box, but that's what it looks like. He's got a walnut top and bottom and maple in between, and I like the combination. It looks good. It does kind of look like an ice cream sandwich. So that's what I'm going to work on, and it's going to take a bit of time because there are so many cuts in the top. So let's take a look at how I've set up my stock for cutting. This is one of those projects where the size is adaptable. Steve mentions that you can make the middle section any thickness you want. I had some 6/4 maple on hand, just under 1.5 inches thick, which is perfect for this project. It was 5.5 inches wide, and I cut off a 1 foot length, enough for 2 of these boxes. After I applied the patterns using scroll saw tape, I cut this piece in half to make it easier to cut on the scroll saw. I'll drill a pilot hole in each of these, make the inside cut, and then make the outside cut. The top and bottom are both made from 1/4 inch walnut. It's a deep, dark brown that contrasts nicely with the off-white maple of the box's center portion. I resawed some 4/4 walnut to make the 1/4 inch thickness. If you'd like to know more about resawing, I'll leave a link to my video on the screen and in the description. The top has a complex pattern requiring a pilot hole for each interior cut. To save time, and because these pieces are thin, I'll stack cut the tops and bottoms 2 at a time. I have the 2 walnut pieces with a 1/8 piece of plywood on the bottom, all held together with several strips of clear packing tape. I put the plywood on the bottom because peeling tape off the bottom piece in a stack is a tedious job. Using a piece of plywood, or paper, avoids that problem. The other advantage to this method is that if there's any tear out on the bottom of the cut, it will be on the waste piece rather than the box top's underside. The 2 bottom pieces will be stack cut in the same manner, but they don't have any exterior cuts, only the scalloped outside edge. I started with the interior cuts on the top, the most challenging part of this box. Because there are so many interior cuts, and most of them are either small or complex shapes, I rate this as an intermediate level project. I made some mistake with the microphone, and I have over 20 minutes of video with no audio, so I'm narrating the first part of this section totally from memory. Since I had to drill many pilot holes for the interior cuts, and a number of them were circles, I drilled them first. I believe there were 2 or 3 different diameters. Once that was done, I switched to a drill bit that would fit the smallest opening while being large enough to accommodate the scroll saw blade. The design repeats 2 adjacent patterns 4 times with a 3rd pattern in the center. I'm stack cutting 2 1/4 inch pieces of walnut with a 1/8 backer, and I chose a number 5 Pegasus modified geometry blade for the task. I have enough experience to make intricate cuts with a number 5 blade, which will cut faster than a number 3. If you're unsure which would be best for you, try the number 3 first. Walnut isn't hard, and that size should work. I usually choose the largest possible blade to make the job go as quickly as possible. I like to work on patterns like this methodically, so I started in the center. These shapes are somewhere between an oval and a teardrop, and they aren't difficult to cut because there are no sharp points. They're small so that you can cut them quickly. You'll spend as much time moving the blade from one opening to the next as you will cutting. You can cut methodically or jump randomly around the top if you prefer, but cutting the way I do, I feel like it can better visualize progress. As I completed the last little cut in this sequence, the middle of the lid was completed and the piece was already taking shape. I moved to the outer layer with the 2 alternating patterns. I'm not sure how to describe them, but you can see them for yourself here. I drilled pilot holes near the circles at one end of the long squiggly shape and cut from there all the way around, following the line until I got back to where I started. The next shape looked like a fat comma, another easy shape to cut just by following the line. The outermost cut is a heart shape, nothing but curves. The second pattern on the outer edge consists of 3 heart shapes, 2 semi-ovals, and a wing-like shape. Again, these shapes are all mostly curves, so there are no sharp angles or points. Follow the cut lines, let the blade do the work, and you'll be okay. The number 5 blade worked well for the interior cuts, so I'll continue using it for the edge cut. Following the line to make the scalloped edges is straightforward. I started at one of the points connecting 2 curves. If I started on a curve when I return to that spot, there would likely be a small bump, and this avoids that. I follow the curved line until I reach the point where the direction changes. I've found the best way to make this smoothly and to leave a pointed rather than a curved directional course is to make the change in the following manner. I stop at the point, then back the blade up just enough so it's no longer cutting. I use the saw blade curve just created, plus the waste area outside the cut line, to turn the workpiece to the new cutting direction. Then I put some forward pressure onto the wood and start feeding it into the blade again. Completing the external cut is a matter of repeating that procedure until you're back at the beginning. After that step, I toss the waste into my trash basket next to the scroll saw. The second top in the middle of that cut stack looked great because there was no tear out and no tape to pull off. I used scroll saw tape to hold the pattern onto the wood, and most of it came off in one piece. The packaging tape was on top of the pattern, so it also came off. The storage section of the box is cut from 1.5-inch thick maple, as I mentioned earlier. Not all scroll saws can handle material this thick, but my Pegasus scroll saw can. I chose a number 12 Pegasus Modified Geometry blade for this box part. I based my blade size choice on the wood's thickness and hardness and the pattern's complexity. The first 2 factors dictate a number 12 blade, and the pattern's not intricate, so I don't need a smaller blade to be able to cut it accurately. As always, I'm making the interior cut first. If I made the external cut first, the circular piece remaining would be smaller and harder to grip than the square block I have now. The method for cutting is the same as for the outer cut on the box tops. I start at the pilot hole, since this is an inside cut to one of the points where the curve changes direction, then follow the line until I reach the point that signals the next direction change. I back off the pressure slightly so the blade is no longer cutting, but I keep it running. I use the saw blade curve just created, plus a tiny bit of waste area in the center to pivot the workpiece slightly to the new cutting direction. I put pressure back on the wood and let the blade start cutting again. This process needs to be done slowly and deliberately. The number 12 blade is large, and there's a lot of surface area in contact with the wood. If you try to rush this, the blade can overheat and start to burn the wood. If the blade overheats, it can break. Another possibility is that you can pull the blade out of the lower blade holder or cause the tension lever on the upper blade holder to spring open because the tension is too great. I know all these possibilities can occur because at one time or another, not in this project, they've all happened to me. Take your time and let the blade do the work. Whenever I do an interior cut like this, I check for cut squareness and blade flex, and it's a good habit for you to develop. I released the upper blade holder and lifted the workpiece off the blade. Then I tried to push the center waste piece out of the bottom of the surrounding square, but it would not go through. I tried again, pushing up from the bottom, and the center slid out with no problems. This little check tells me I had one of 2 problems. Possibly both, but unlikely. The first possible reason for this happening is that the blade is not set at 90 degrees to the table. I check this periodically and know the table is securely locked, so this is not the cause. I've done this before, and the waste could only be removed from one direction because I put too much pressure on the blade, which flexed during cutting. This means the extra tension on the blade prevented it from making a perfect 90-degree cut. This maple is hard and thick, cutting is a slow process, and I unknowingly put extra pressure on the blade, causing it to flex. In other words, I didn't take my time and let the blade do the work. With the center cut done, it's time to let the blade do the work on the outside of this part. Maybe I'll get it right this time. There's nothing new to add. This is a repeat of the inside cuts, one semicircle after another. Because this was an outside cut, when I returned to the starting place, I turned the workpiece to cut through to the outside. Even with this relief cut, I could not push the part from the top down to the bottom. This tells me I was still putting too much pressure on the blade, or all the stress had bent it permanently out of shape. I completed a lot of cutting with that blade, so I'll probably consider it spent, toss it, and start my next project with a new blade. It's time for assembly. I noticed a tiny amount of tear out on the lid liner, those little fuzzies that you frequently get on the bottom of a piece. The Pega scroll saw blades do a great job, but some finishing by hand with 120 grit sandpaper makes things right. I checked the top to determine which side I wanted to face out and which to face in. This inner lid will cover up any tiny problems in the wood where it's attached to the top. The other step I took was to align the grain in these two pieces. Wood expands and contracts with changes in temperature and humidity, and boards glued together with the grain crossing could cause the piece to warp or separate. The spaces between the cuts on the box top are minuscule, so I'm using a glue bottle with a tiny tip to apply drops of glue where needed. I purchase glue a gallon at a time, then refill my small and medium-sized dispensers. This was originally a school glue bottle filled with Elmer's white glue. As I was dabbing glue spots in place, I was reminded of the old Brill Cream jingle, "A little dab will do you." I'd sing it, but it might earn me a copyright violation. I used 4 spring clamps to hold the pieces together tightly while the glue dries. This type of clamp is perfect for tasks like this. However, these must be clamped properly because thin wood like this tends to warp when glue is applied. In the past, I've had some poor glue joints fail due to improper clamping. The box's middle needed a bit of sanding before I glued on the bottom. I don't want those little fuzzies glued into place. Once again, I needed an applicator with a fine tip to apply the glue. The edge is narrow and has many curves, making it an interesting process. I placed a glue bead around the perimeter, then I used a fingertip to ensure it was spread evenly. I carefully aligned the curves on the maple piece with those on the walnut bottom. I didn't measure the placement, as I thought the placement was pleasing to the eye. This is not an easy combination of parts to clamp. The edge of the maple section is thin, so there's not much area for a clamp to hold. I've made items like this before and found a workable solution using the vise at the end of the workbench. I cranked open the vise wide enough to accommodate the piece, then tightened it securely. That took care of half the box, and I used 3 F-clamps for the top half. Once the glue is dry in both these glue-ups, the box will be ready for finishing. Since the top had all those interior cuts, the most logical finish was a spray. I used Minwax warm satin and gave the box several coats. While we're on the subject of finishes, I'm working on a video on the various finishes I use. I hope to have that completed and edited within the next 2 weeks. In the meantime, 2 suggested videos to watch next are on the screen now, and there are over 200 to watch on my playlists. I'd love to read your comments, and I respond to each one. Of course, please subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't already done so. Comments and subscriptions help me grow the channel.